I have nothing else to add. I've totally covered it all the way down the line.
Okay, this bodes well. Okay, well, I'm going to dive into something a bit deeper that Harry said there. Like, there's a lot of talk about the impending recession. From your experience, like, how is that affecting what investors look into, what investors are willing to pour money into? Same for kind of publishers, I guess. What they're willing, what bets they're willing to make in the face of a recession.
I guess there are two viewpoints. One is that, games are slightly separate from tech and broader markets. It's been touted as recession-proof and recession-resilient. I don't think that we faced a recession as we do now with the same business model that we have now, which is free-to-play versus premium. Previously, you're going up against film and TV in terms of people's time and spend, and you spend $60 on a premium game and you get a lot out of it. And so there was a substitution effect there, whereas now, with mobile being the majority of the market, I think you're going to have to think about, actually, for the whales who are spending a lot of money, at least, again, this is in the free-to-play environment, will that recession adversely affect them? Will that reduce their spend more or less than, let's say, a premium game? And then, I guess the flip side, there's a lot of dry powder that's out there. I think with the recession that's potentially coming and the cost of living crisis, I think that's going to things that are perceived as either lower risk or higher quality in terms of the experience of the team. So again, I'm trying to make this as useful as possible for developers. I would just try and think about, when you are pitching for investment, who your team are, and then also link that in with the vision of your company, and I guess why it's some way prescient, thinking towards, again, as a VC, we're thinking 5-10 years in the future. Doesn't mean that the game itself that you're pitching now is going to be the finished iteration, that it's going to hit on all of these points that are relevant now. If anything, we're looking for that long-term macro. Even though there is this recession, it shouldn't really affect what's interesting in 5 to 10 years. So that's, I'm having my cake and eating it by arguing both sides.
Yeah, it's really weird right now. It's really hard to sort of guess the impact of the upcoming recession because, the last big recession we had, 2008, that was kind of prior to all the free-to-play changes in the market. You had Nintendo Wii sales going up, actually, during the recession last time. People who are unemployed tend to look for the cheapest, most cost-effective form of home entertainment, which is games usually. But unemployment is really low. There's this time around, and we don't know how things are going to be impacted. So yeah, I'm definitely seeing on the VC side, whilst a lot of VCs last year closed funds, they got tons of money to deploy, that have to deploy. I'm kind of getting the sense from VCs that is a kind of almost an opportunity for them to bring the valuations for the companies to a more sane level than it was. With regards to the publisher side, I actually am counseling a little bit for studios that are trying to find publishers or have successfully received offers from publishers, just to think about and be careful what happens if this publisher goes bust in the next few years. Make sure that your contract, I don't think you have to worry about curve sake, but there's definitely a lot of new publishers where I'm a bit like, I'm not entirely sure if they're going to survive. I think you need to think about what happens if it does go bankrupt. Yeah.
I think also with the amount of new studios that were sort of, I guess, forged in the crucible of the pandemic that had that time and, were able to, or were lucky enough to make something out of it, they're kind of coming into this phase of they've got something to share and to pitch. And publishers may be looking for something more reliable in the market, and it's a horrible thing to have to kind of discuss almost with, you know, these kind of creative and passionate people. Like, where do you place yourself in the market? Like, who is going to buy this game? And if there is, you know, this upcoming recession, people are going to be making more conscious decisions about what they're spending not only their money on, but what they're going to spend their time on. And how are you going to work with a publisher, and how are you going to sell to a publisher that this is something that we believe that people are going to want to invest their time and money into over something like a free-to-play, over something like a AAA title. And, you know, if you can believe in that and invest in us, then, you know, let's in 2 years' time, where are we going to be once the game is finished? You know, having that forethought about where to place it, because, yeah, people right now are going to want something that they can believe that is going to do well in uncertain times, which is a hard thing to do, especially when you're more creative or you're looking to rely on a publisher for those business decisions.
Some really good points. I just agree with everything. It's so good. Well, you guys are so smart. So I don't know. For me, I always think long term, and it's not like a sprint. It's a marathon, right? It's a long-term play whenever we invest in the studios that we work with. So I like to work with studios that have a longer-term vision, that their games become like a platform for the community that we create together. And that way, it's kind of like we can hopefully just ride through this kind of patch that we're going to have to go through globally. But yeah, we'd want to make safe bets. That's what we believe are safe bets, with credible teams that are really passionate about the games that they're making, and that there's something where there's this kind of longer-term vision that we can buy into.
So I guess at that point, like, what sort of things are investors and publishers looking for at the moment? How has that changed in the last couple of years? Like, I know I'm aware I'm doing that thing where I'm bundling a bunch of questions into one here, but bear with me. Like, are there kind of new trends or areas that are particularly interesting or particularly reliable, as you guys have suggested? Yeah, like what are the areas of opportunity in terms of if you're a studio going for, like, you know, investment or a publishing deal, like what sort of areas are you going to be better suited in?
I think to like jump off what Bobby just said, for us, our strategy is kind of twofold. So we not only look for experienced teams who have a track record of not necessarily like commercial success, but delivering polished games that we believe in and we you know, understand they have that level of credibility, but also in investigating new talent and new studios and new teams of all different levels, and you know, believing in them and what they could be in 5-10 years time. Their first game might not be that like superstar hit, but given the experience, what will they go on to make next? And that's obviously a difficult thing to manage, because you cannot predict these things, but without giving those teams a try to make something, then they'll never go on to make that smash hit as well. So I think even if you're a first-time team, or you're just kind of pulling together your first game, having worked in different places, there's always opportunities for growth in the long term. You don't need to just be thinking about this game right now. Like, what's your strategy after you've made your first game? Do you have goals, dreams, ambitions? I think it's really important to share those with your potential publisher or someone who's going to invest in you, so that they can also join you on like dreaming about that long-term success as well.
Opportunities. I'm going to take a slightly different angle. I think, I don't know, some people might groan at this, because it's like, maybe it's not an opportunity anymore, but Web3, NFT, maybe, right? Like VR will probably get a resurgence with VR2 coming up. It's an exciting new platform, which is always a good place to kind of, well, while the install base is low, it's like a blue ocean, so you can really stand out. And potentially there's lots of strategic people who believe that it's of a strategic importance who will then invest. Maybe there's things like the subscription model stuff, whether it be Game Pass or PS Plus, so that could be interesting. But I think ultimately, working with a publisher is the biggest opportunity because they will investigate all of those things for you. They will invest in you and your team. You get to probably keep the IP, depending on the deal terms, and you get to kind of experiment on someone else's dime, right? So it's kind of like no real risk for you. So I think working with a good publisher is probably where it's at. But then there's probably a whole bunch of publishers that won't survive. You're quite right. I think it's going to happen.
You're seeing also a bit of a specialization for publishers, that I think is a new trend, as to your question, and investors. So I think you're seeing like new publishers that's springing up are focusing on one particular genre or type of game, which I think is a good approach. And you may, as a indie game studio, particularly want to talk to those publishers early. Going back to what you're saying, Bobby, as well, I really do think I'm advising pretty much any new indie game studio that wants to have a breakout hit to look seriously at VR. I think that PC, console, mobile are extremely competitive, saturated platforms. VR, on the other hand, it has enough success stories, enough data that you can understand what works and what doesn't work. But it's a blue ocean. So there's plenty of space to innovate, experiment, try something new. And there's also, at this point, enough of an install base for VR headset makers out there that you can make decent sales. There's also support, financial support from various platforms that have very good deal terms, possibly better than publishers at this point. And for now, it's an opportunity that is existing right now. But I think the games market is always dynamic. I think it's always an issue for indies is working out when your game actually releases, what is the market going to be like, and it's almost impossible. So yes, always a challenge for indie game developers.
Yeah, and I guess also I alluded to what other investors are looking for, and then I'll actually set out what we're looking for, which are two different things actually. So I think there's a big movement of, I'd say, like foals, as in fear of looking stupid, where there's a lot of capital that's stored up. There are worries about raising more capital, either as a publisher or as a VC fund, and so they're putting it into things that aren't necessarily the most innovative. But if they were to look back and they put in 20, 30 million into this particular company or this team, people will be like, oh yeah, no, that made sense at the time. I wouldn't have not done that, but that isn't what almost VC and publishers are there for. I'm thinking about breaking the boundary or whatever the frontier of either creatively or technologically within gaming. So Bobby mentioned crypto. I think there are some interesting things, not even necessarily with the technology. It's also within the business model in game transactions and how new game experiences can be generated from that. I think actually geolocation might be interesting, not necessarily even within games. I mean, it's hard to scale a game without strong IP, but I think that's a little bit untapped. There are some opportunities within PC console as well still, although it's harder. Mobile is very tough. Also, AI, I don't think we've mentioned. It's still far away off, but obviously as investing at the pre-seed and seed, it's something that we're looking at, particularly over the next 5 to 10 years, how that will change things. We're seeing now in pitch decks where people just use Mid-Journey to generate art, which is interesting, but then when you apply that, and it will take time and it goes in spurts, applying that to video and 3D assets, what new game experience and all platforms can you generate from that, where either you have some kind of AI developer in the background or the player themselves can create these new experiences very easily. And so I'm slightly excited that not only on the nerdy side, but also because of what games could be made from that.
I realise this is an investment panel, but we've said the word publisher enough. I'm going to dive a little deeper into that. In this day and age, do you even need a publisher? Now, I'm aware that at least 2 people on this panel will say yes. And to you, I say why?
I'll go first. Yes, you do.
Shocking.
Yeah, who would have thought? But you do. I think you do, genuinely. Well, it helps, right? It really, really helps because, like last year on Steam, there was over 10,000 games released. And this year we're on track for there to be more games released on Steam. And there's just so many games, right? There's just so many. So if you want to put your heart and soul into a game, onto a project with you and your buddies or you and your colleagues, and for 2 years, and you put your own money into it, and then what, right? And then let's say you've run out of time, you've run out of cash, you have to release a game, you've got cash flow issues. If you had a publisher, they would have given you that extra time and money, and you'd be able to polish the game, and you'd be able to support the game beyond the initial release. You'd get all the marketing help and the business development, and just so much that is so helpful. If I was starting a development studio, I'm married, I have 2 children, I want to make sure they continue to have a roof over their head rather than put all my eggs into that basket and take all the risk myself. So I just think on so many levels it's helpful to have a publisher.
Just to add to that as well, outside of the business and investment part of it, often the teams that work on the publishing side have worked in development themselves, and they can bring a lot of their own experience to help you through the difficult and tough parts of getting your game to market. Now, I'm painting with a broad stroke here. This is not always the case, but loads of teams that we talk to don't even have a producer or anyone who is a producer who's looked at their development plan or the kind of stretch goals, and it's a lot of what they bring to publishers straight away is we can recognize it as have you estimated this correctly? Is this even feasible? And those are, as well as the marketing aspects of it, most publishers will have expert marketing teams who can help you with strategy and positioning and getting the most bang for your marketing buck. And it means that your team is more free to concentrate on the things that you are good at and you enjoy, which is making the game itself. Let your publisher coach you and help you and learn from them. And in the case of many teams, they're big enough independent teams that they may have this infrastructure anyway, but a good publisher will be there to support you with that as well, in a way that you don't need to invest upfront in hiring people or bringing on contractors or getting a mate to do a bit of work on the side spreadsheeting for you. So I think that there's a lot of industry expertise that a publisher can give in terms of coaching that's not just financial as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up from that because it's a really good point that you should also try before you buy, chat with people who have either been published by that particular publishing label, see what their experience is like, as well as almost asking them to pitch back to you, why should I go with you? And it's the same with also on the VC investment side. Our partner's got 60 plus years operating experience. We've now been investing for over a decade. We've got 35 portfolio companies, so we try and help them collaborate together. We basically get in the weeds and help out with game strategy, hiring, business development, fundraising, etc. So I think you can just go for the highest bid, but then there's also understanding, is this good value for money? Is this going to maximize the potential that we have either for this game? And again, to contrast between publishers and investors, we're trying to enable studios to have multiple shots on goal, and maybe if the first game doesn't succeed and probability dictates that it probably won't succeed, that you're able to pivot either with that game or go into a new direction. And that's something that we work with our studios on.
I have this conversation with studios all the time, and it's really a case-by-case basis. So I'll just give you some examples of different studios that suit a publisher. So often, first-time studios, new studios, they would be suitable for a publisher would be helpful. Because all the things that Lauren and Bobby have said, all the help that they can give you. If you've never launched a game before of the scale that you're aiming at, a publisher can be super helpful for that. If your game is a sort of game that really benefits from a kind of marketing campaign where there's a build-up to launch and a lot of press coverage at launch, publishers tend to be very good at that. Your game is more of a community-driven sort of game, and you really also want to build a fan base around your studio, you want to make multiple games in this specific niche or genre that you're inhabiting, then I would say maybe think not about getting a publisher, get project financing or investor, because sometimes publishers, it's better for you to develop your own internal publishing capabilities, your own internal marketing capabilities, like community management is often done best within a studio. So if you're taking a very strong community marketing approach, then you might want to consider doing it yourself. And especially when sometimes the publishers can get in the way of that kind of player feedback, that is really crucial. I think that if you have been the lead designer on one of the top games and one of the biggest game studios on the planet, then you want to make your own game, your own studio, and you want to conquer the world, you'll probably want to go for a VC money. So it really varies from studio to studio, your specific circumstances. And no broad brush strokes here. It's very, but it is totally possible to self-publish and be successful self-publishing for a studio. Yeah.
So, what would you say that developers need aside from a great game? And not to brush over that, because building a great game is very hard work. I say that like I've built loads of great games. I haven't, obviously. I've tried to build one game, it was awful. What do developers need, other than the great game, to convince investors or publishers to take a bet on them, to actually kind of pour money and invest in them and support in them? What do they need other than that great game to win over the support they need?
So, yeah, in all honesty, the prototype or demo, the vertical slice, that is the number one important piece that is convincing to publishers. You can have a fantastic pitch, but if the actual game is not fun, unless you have like a really, you demonstrate that your team has got like the perfect experience to make this sort of game, those kind of, like a very experienced team can get funding from just concept sometimes, but in most cases you'll have to show through your game that it's something special. So that is the number one most important thing. But it helps to show, I think having the demo also shows that you are capable of making the game, or proves out to some extent that you're capable of making a game, and that's really important if you're a first-time studio. The question I always get from developers is, how polished, how extensive, how big should the prototype demo should be? And that, again, it varies a lot depending on the studio. So the more experience your studio has, the less advanced you can get away with a less advanced prototype or what have you. If you're a first-time studio, you probably really want to have like a full-on vertical slice. If you have like a strategy game, those kind of games tend to not rely too much on having beautiful graphics, so you can get away with placeholder art. But if you're going for like a narrative game, like a poetry-like game, you probably do want to have all the arts, the sound, music, etc., like a full-on like chapter 1 of your game. So it really just think through logically from a publisher point of view what is going to be seen. And you have to remember there are 5,000 games being pitched to publishers every year. So you have to, in order to stand out, having a really good prototype, demo, what have you, is often really important.
If you have a multiplayer game that you're pitching, please, please, please have multiplayer proven to be working, especially if your ambition is to have large multiplayer, multi-platform cross-play. It says a lot that you can figure out the technical aspects of it, because when it comes to figuring that out later, once it's, if you get signed and you're like, we have to remake the game from the bottom up, that's going to really harm your relationship with the publisher or investor going forwards, and you know, you don't want to be delaying things, you want to be continuing to move. So figuring out all of the complicated aspects of whatever type of game you're publishing in advance is really good. And also having a good production plan is great too. I like that.
I kind of hear some trauma coming out there.
just advice, general advice.
It is so true though. You need a viable plan. You definitely need a build. You need time. That's like so important, that because a lot of publishers or VCs, it takes time to sign on the dotted line, to finally agree on everything that you're going to do together. So you need that time. You can't just be like, oh, we're going to run out of cash next month, so let's try and do something. You know, it's too late pretty much at that point. Like at Curve, the quickest we signed a deal was 29 calendar days from pitch to signing. But that doesn't happen all the time. Most of the time it takes longer, right? So you need time to be able to make sure you network, you start to establish good leads, you follow up, and then eventually, maybe you do eventually land a deal, and you probably need 6 months, really. And you need the time to be able to do the networking and go out and speak to all these people and have all the rejections, because it's just a series of no's, right? And then eventually you get like a yes, and you like try and follow that one.
You're lucky if you get no's. Usually it's just like people ignore you. So, yes.
So you need that determination, right, and time that you put into it. So someone on your team has to be allocating some time to be able to go out and represent your studio. And make sure there's someone on your team that's acting as a producer and has a viable plan that an investor can believe in, that you've got a viable project that they can get behind, as well as having a great game. I could just keep going, but I'll stop.
Just to mention on our timings as well, it's ranged from 9 days all the way up to a year, where we've said no to this round, this is what we want from you, in terms of hiring and where the game is and the strategy, and then they've gone ahead and just done everything that they've said, and then we said, oh, okay, great, we'll invest. And obviously, I'm trivializing it, but it is an ongoing conversation. Sometimes you're not at the right place, or we're wanting to see certain things, and then it's also, I guess, illustrating how you might develop in the future, how you respond to those questions, both during the investment process, as well as maybe afterwards it's a no or a maybe because of these things. On our side, we don't require a playable, we don't require a demo. 30% of our investments have been pre-company formation, although in the US, for tax purposes, that isn't true. They were incorporated beforehand. Otherwise, a big tax bill. So what we're looking for is, if you don't have a game, if you don't have any traction to speak of, it's about the narrative, it's about founder, market fit, why you're best place, either because of experience or lack thereof, in a certain area, and then also two pretty simple filters for us, and it gets through a lot of the deals that we see. One, is this in gaming or is this relevant to gaming? You'll be surprised at how many people just pitch us on non-gaming things, out the way. And then there's another one, which is this going to be a maybe $500 billion company? Because so many of our companies fail. And so therefore we need to think about what's going to return the fund if it does succeed. I.e. for content, maybe generating at least $100 million a year in ARR. So it's that level of ambition that we want to see from people pitching to us. And as Cassia was actually saying, that there are some places where publishing money is far better than VC funding. We're looking at maximizing the upside of whatever big ambitious thing you're going for, but actually a publisher's really good, and it's not mutually exclusive as well. For, okay, maybe it's not going to be the big industry-changing game, but actually it's just a nice game, underserved market, maybe a little niche, but it's going to be a great money generator for you and also for the publisher. So why not go for it?
We've got about 5 minutes left, and Jamie has been 10 minutes. We've got 10 minutes left, and Jamie has been sitting down for too long. So does anybody have any questions? Yes, one right there.
So often this gets brushed off as edutainment or serious games or insert publisher trigger word here, like education, teach, learn, all that stuff. But there's this thing, this climate crisis thing happening, and we've tackled far more complicated things. But there seems to be this roadblock about making games that involve anything to do with climate change. Maybe there's a little audio log that mentions it in a blip on the side of your murder fantasy, but games that are intrinsically about restorative things, like bringing ecosystems back to life, or restorative stuff, rather than exploitative, rather than taking, rather than destroying, rather than all those fantasies we played over and over and over again and make up 95% of the saturated market. What are publisher and investor attitudes on using games to address the climate crisis? It's the most powerful media on Earth. We don't need to convince anyone in this room of that. Where are they?
So that's an interesting question. I think, first of all, I'm seeing more pitches from game studios that sort of tackle this sort of climate change approach in lots of different interesting ways. I think Devolver Digital recently published Terra Nils. Yep, that's kind of like also on that scale. I think, having looked at serious games, by far and away the most successful serious game I think that has been is probably This War of Mine. And that really did a fantastic job of integrating the core game mechanics of a survival resource management game to reflect the experience of a civilian trying to survive a war. Brilliantly done. So I am really excited to see more studios pitching this kind of game. I think a lot of it's just like respecting the player. You have to be really careful not to lecture players. It's got to be subtly done. It's still got to be. It's still got to really grip the player. Entertain maybe is almost the wrong word. I'm not sure if you can say This War of Mine is entertaining, but extremely gripping. It's doable. It's very hard. And I think that sometimes I think with studios that pitch this kind of game, I'm a bit like, I think you just, want to portray yourself as the do-gooding game developer rather than actually thinking about the players and trying to, immerse them in a game that really is moving. So you've got to. I think it takes just an even extra skill to be able to pull it off. But I think it is doable, and I think investors, publishers can and do respond to this to the great execution if they see it.
Yeah, I'll just also add on to this. I've seen it where it's been added on as a gimmick, where literally it's because the game itself isn't sufficient that it isn't, I feel like, good enough or interesting enough, and that they're just putting it on, say, oh, we're going to lower our CPIs by including this charity, or saying that we're going to plant trees for this particular ad campaign. So I'm wanting to see, A, is the game good, and B, is it more like intrinsic to the game experience itself? Is it not just an add-on? How is the game experience molded by the fact that, okay, we're trying to go through the restorative theme, maybe going through like some kind of open world sandbox, but a lot of those are like, okay, we've got some merge game, and it's going to plant a tree for this particular campaign, which I don't think is sufficient. It's tactical, but to your point, I'm not excited by that unless the game's really good, in which case it doesn't really matter about that particular ad campaign.
Yeah, like we like to have a lot of games that shoot people in the face. If you just look at the market, right? There's a lot of just shoot them in the face and you get points, feel good, which is quite repetitive. We've announced a game that we've signed. It's called Among Ripples. It's got this kind of watercolor kind of look. It's really lovely, and it's sci-fi kind of setting in near future. You're a team of scientists, and you go around restoring lakes. So it's like literally, in a way, it's like a lake simulator. And there's all these toxic lakes, and you go in on the level, and it's like a management sim game, and it's like super chill. So like we love it. It's a great game. It's like, because a lot of management sims are quite stressful affairs. You have to pull everything together, and if you don't do it all right, then it could just turn into chaos. So it's quite stressy. But here you've got like a super chill game in terms of like, it's like a cozy sim, and it just looks lovely, and it's got like this kind of chill music, and you're going around restoring lakes and increasing the biodiversity, and it's kind of using real science to kind of show to make sure that you're progressing in the game correctly. I guess you have to have these plants and fishes and other biodiversity in the lake to make sure that the ecology of the lake is kind of revived to what it should be. but it's not preachy. It's not like an education game. It's not like, pardon? No, but it's like, I think the point I'm trying to make is like, it shouldn't be coming across as an education game or serious game. It should just be a great game that happens to be on that subject that's really relevant, right? So I'd like to see more of them, for sure.
I would love to see more. I guess we categorize them as like games for good. Games that either have like a message or are in some way contributing to shining a light on important real-world factors, political or not. Often the struggle for us as a publisher is the market viability aspect and the way that the game is or is presented, which is fundamentally down to the way the developers want to develop it. And we don't ever want to tell people that they should impinge. We're not trying to impinge on the vision they have for the project and how they want to reach players. And also, are we the right person to make this game reach the biggest market? Like, we would, even if we loved and believed in a title, if we couldn't find a really strong way to actually make this game find its audience, or if our team wasn't able to come up with a strategy to help this game find success with the most people, we would have to pass on something like that and hopefully allow them to pursue options of more suitable partners. Maybe other larger publishers or publishers within sort of like bigger companies like us might struggle with the same thing. We're more used to, and we have more, support for commercial games. And I think you said earlier about how many publishers have popped up, there probably are more boutique publishers that will form in the near future, in the next few years, to have the right connections with the right PR and the right people to bring these games to the audience that they deserve to reach. Yeah.
Any other questions? Multiple.
Yeah, hi guys. This is Investment Summit. It's really about cash. On to the two publishers, Bobby and Lauren, how many of your developers that come to you are actually looking for cash, for completion finance to finish the game? I'm not talking about for the business development and the marketing side of it, the actual publishing route to market side. I'm talking about primarily, I've run out of money, or I think I'm going to run out of money because developers are notoriously bad at managing cash flow. I'm going to give you some runway though. I've got about 3-4 months. Can I have some money? I mean, how many of them actually are coming to you and saying, I want to publish a game, but I need money as well?
Do you want to answer first? I'm just going to check.
Most developers that pitch to us need cash to finish development, and that can come at various stages, whether they've just done pre-production and they want to roll onto production, or whether they've had investment from governments or investment funds to take them to a certain stage, and they would like a publishing partner to fund the rest of development as well as take care of the business costs like marketing, QA, things like that. I would say most of them.
It's loading, but it's definitely more than 90%. It's like most of them definitely ask for cash. But there's a lot of money out there now, so not everyone nowadays, as much as before probably, because there's like lots of cool government programs and there's other types of investment that people can get.
It's true, we have a shortage of that kind of equity level cash, and so finding publishers who will also pay for the development costs as well. It's not just clear cut saying, well, we do 90% of it. Yes, we probably do, but there's a lot of publishers out there who won't spend much money at all on that area.
I mean, there's a small number of project finance funds that don't provide any of the services, but do provide, so usually I think it could be like small amounts, or it could be up like 1 million, 2 million, that kind of level. And then there's also publishers that don't offer any funding at all, but they do offer the services in exchange for a share of revenues. And you've got everything on the spectrum in between, right? So generally I sort of categorize publishers by their funding cap So I have kind of a database of different publishers, how much they. There's a lot in the indie space which does like $500,000 up to. There's some that do like $1 million or so, and there's some that do like infinite amounts. But then they're quite aggressive deal terms, so they end up taking over IP, for example. So yeah, it varies a lot. And I think actually it is good that you have a ton of different opportunities now for funding as an indie game developer. You, whilst yes, each publisher is getting like 5,000 pitches, you also have hundreds of potential funding options because there's been so much money flowing into the games industry during the COVID crisis. So you can take advantage of that.
And just to also agree and disagree with your point, our check sizes are between 500K and 2 million. And there's a lot of capital, but usually at the later stage where you do have some kind of workable prototype and you're doing some play testing with it, you've got some feedback, at least for our portfolio companies, and then you're able to raise Series A, B, C onwards. So we're trying to fight the good fight, but I do agree, I'm surprised that not more people do it, even though we've been doing it for the past decade and had some great successes. It's still really only us and maybe a few other funds who are really focusing on that early stage.
I think we're going to try and squeeze in one last question.
Hi, thank you very much for the panel. I'm curious to know what do you think, what genres of games would do really well on PC over the next 10 years?
10 years, that's a long time.
Go on, Bobby.
I said a quick question.
So, like, in terms of trends, it always happens as, like, flavour of the month kind of stuff. So, like, when PUBG and Fortnite were taking off, it was all, like, Battle Royale pitches were coming in thick and fast. And then it was, like, lots of, like, Souls-like games. And then there's, like, lots of roguelites and roguelikes coming through as well now. There's a lot of, like, Hades plus this and this kind of stuff that you see a lot of today. But I think a staple, really good staple for PC always has been, and hopefully it remains, because I love them too, is strategy games. There's so many subgenres of strategy games as well. So I'd say strategy games are quite a good staple, hopefully. Because I'd hate for it to disappear as a genre, because I love the stuff.
I mean, I'm just by our portfolio, multiplayer as a given, at least for the kind of returns that we're going after. But I feel like co-op has been underserved. We invest into a number of studios, including Vela out in Ireland and Treehouse in Los Angeles, that are going after that space because it has been underserved, and that hasn't been a proper games as a service, free-to-play game that's really been pushed out there for the kind of players who are after that. We've also got another studio that's doing an MMO, which is obviously an easy task. But they've raised a lot of capital, and they're trying to go after, again, coziness. So I feel like the core audience within PC has been catered for a long time. I'm trying to think about audience and market expansion. Games are becoming more and more social. What are the kind of experiences that are there? There's definitely, like, as Bobby said, shoot them in the face kind of experiences, which are going to engender certain social experiences. But then what about, I want to play Animal Crossing, but I don't want to pay the Nintendo online subscription, and I'm not able to do much in other people's islands. How do we actually deepen those kind of connections? And so looking for games that are going down that lane.
I think it's pretty much the indie game studio's job to surprise us, really. I mean, I think we all look to indies to be the ones who are inventing new game genres and inventing new game experiences, like something fresh and new and different that no one's ever seen before. And because you're small and nimble, usually that's the case that you can experiment. I think I have no idea which great games, what games are going to be successful in the next 10 years. But that's great. I'm super looking forward to finding out.
Yeah, I agree. I told you to double down on that. It's indies who definitely set the tone for what becomes popular, I think, and what larger companies see success in, and they try and build upon that. I would personally like to see, and I have enjoyed seeing, the rise in popularity for more sort of like cozy, wholesome games, plant-growing, aligned, gentle farming games, which traditionally were had for, you know, handheld, DS, Switch, that are, as more people have access to more powerful laptops for cheaper, especially as Steam Deck is coming out as a more accessible way to play games on the go. I think we'll see more people wanting those relaxing experiences for travel, and that will kind of come through in the Steam Deck coming up in popularity.
I totally love the wholesome.
Yeah.
So nice. Yes, give me all the cottagecore.
Cottagecore games, exactly.
There you go, that's the next genre, cottagecore. That is all we've got time for. Thank you so much for joining us, and please give a big thank you to my panel.
Time now, so hopefully food is going to be served in the break room just down the corridor. We'll be back at 1:30 with Hero Capital, some more investment talk with Hero discussing angel investing with